It's 1588. Tensions are high. Paris is like a hornet's nest after the recent developments. Henry of Guise demands the governorship of Normandy as a reward for serving his country, but the king cannot allow the Guise to gain even more power, therefore the request is denied. Even worse, the Duke is banished from the capital, and the governorship is given to the king's other lackey, the Duke of Mayenne. This is an affront Henry of Guise cannot accept. In May 1588, he enters Paris anyway, followed by a large retinue. The city's gates are thrown open, and Guise is welcomed by cheering crowds. By now, the capital is de facto under the control of the Committee of the 16. The militia is on their side, and the king's orders are being openly defied. Catherine of Medici feels compelled to cozy up to the League. However, Henry III is already planning his counter-move. On the 11th of May, the king orders several battalions of Swiss into the capital. This is a big mistake. Having foreign troops in Paris is something unheard of. Instigated by the 16, the Parisian mob begins to erect barricades. The Swiss try to restore order, but the militiamen overwhelm them by sheer numbers. Guise considers the situation and decides to offer the king a way out. On May 13th, the Swiss are allowed to leave, followed by Henry III shortly after. Now, the Guise are at the height of their power. The League rules the better part of the country, and the 16 officially take charge in Paris. More pressure is put on the king to obtain further concessions. In July 1588, Henry is forced to sign the Edict of Union, a radical document promising the extermination of Protestantism. The king also pledges to dismiss Mayenne and give Normandy to the Guise. Most importantly, he agrees to name the Cardinal of Bourbon as his heir. The League's coup is carefully timed to coincide with another major move, the deployment of the Spanish Armada. In July, more than 100 Spanish vessels form an impenetrable wall of wood stretching for miles in the English Channel. They are tasked with picking up the Duke of Parma and a large army of veterans who are intended to invade England. With his flank secured by the Catholic League, Philip II believes he can pull this off. But the English are led by the most skillful sailors of the day, John Hawkins and Francis Drake. The English take advantage of the winds and use an age-old tactic against the Spanish: fire ships. With this ploy, the Armada is scattered and forced to sail around the British Isles. Parma has to stay put, and the invasion of England is called off. Protestants all across Europe rejoice. Henry III also gains courage and decides to reclaim the initiative. First, he tries to subvert the League at the Estates Generales, but to his dismay, he finds out that most of the delegates are supporters of the League. Undaunted, the king determines that harsher measures are needed. The Guise have to be taken care of St. Bartholomew style. On the 23rd of December 1588, as soon as he enters the king's chambers, Henry of Guise is stabbed to death. The similarities between this and the fate that befell Coligny 16 years earlier are not lost to the Leaguers. The areas controlled by Catholics explode with rage. Henry of Guise had been their saviour, the last chance to maintain the country's integrity. Now that he's gone, Henry's brother, the Duke of Mayenne, is put in overall charge, and the Catholics become even more radical. The king is chased out of his realm, and only controls a few towns in the Loire Valley. Catherine of Medici dies in January, leaving him even more exposed. He is out of options now. He cannot let the Guise get away. However, being powerless himself, he will need allies to reclaim his country. Henry III has no other choice but to make a pact with Henry of Navarre. The Treaty of Plessis-les-Tours is signed in April 1589. The king and the Protestants join their forces and strike at the heart of the League, Paris. Paris is too large to be taken by storm, so the Allies surround the city in order to starve it out. Catholics within the city become even more radical. Moderates and royalists are purged. Henry III is declared the devil incarnate. Those who were loyal subjects of the crown just 10 years ago are now fierce republicans. Many preachers call for the death of the king. One man among the crowd, a Dominican friar, decides to take things into his own hands. On August 1st, 1589, claiming that he is a deserter carrying important messages, the friar mortally stabs the king. As Henry III lays dying, he names Navarre as his successor and urges him to convert to Catholicism for the sake of the nation. Navarre refuses this for now. In response, the Leaguers concoct elaborate theories to confirm the Cardinal of Bourbon's primacy to the throne. The siege of Paris continues, but as the weeks go by, more and more men desert from Navarre. He has to lift the siege eventually, and begins his retreat to Normandy. Navarre marches to Dieppe, where he hopes to receive reinforcements from England. Seeing that Navarre is on the back foot, Mayenne sallies from Paris with a large force. He follows Navarre all the way to Dieppe. He needs to capture the town before English reinforcements can arrive. However, to do this, he has to cross a marshy river at the small village of Arques. Navarre is already prepared, laying out his forces in 2 trenches that block the only crossing. He barely has 5,000 soldiers compared to Mayenne's 24,000. This overwhelming superiority in numbers makes Mayenne overconfident. He walks into Navarre's trap with full conviction. On the 21st of September 1589, as a dense fog settles over the battlefield, Mayenne makes his first move. He sends forth a battalion of Germans who pretend to be deserters. The men in the first trench take the bait. The Germans suddenly turn on them, as Mayenne himself launches a cavalry assault. The League's forces manage to overwhelm the first trench. However, when they get to the second trench, they are welcomed with murderous fire. The fog suddenly clears, allowing the gunners in the fortress of Arques a clear view. Now the League's forces receive devastating flanking fire, in addition to being shot at from the trench. This is too much for Mayenne's forces, and they give up the battle. Mayenne tries to take the crossing a few more times, however Navarre manages to hold on to his positions. Soon reinforcements arrive from England and from the south of France. Now Mayenne has to retreat and Navarre follows. The League's forces regroup in Paris. Meanwhile, Navarre preoccupies himself with small sieges around the capital. He blockades Paris during November, however his forces are insufficient to prevent reinforcements from reaching the city. The siege becomes futile, so Navarre returns to winter quarters. Hostilities resume in the spring of 1590. Navarre approaches the capital and draws the League army to the northwest. The 2 armies meet on the 14th of March 1590 at the village of Ivry. Navarre is again outnumbered with 11,000 soldiers against the League's 16,000. Both sides arrange their forces in mixed blocks of cavalry and infantry. Again, the main difference is that while the League's cavalry still charges with a lance, Navarre's cavalry are all pistoliers. The first move is made by League cavalry who charge Navarre's lines. The initial engagement is soon joined by more cavalry squadrons in the centre. Henry of Navarre personally enters the fray, putting his life at risk to achieve victory. When Navarre's reserve charges into the flanks, the League centre begins to unravel. Mayenne has to retreat, leaving behind a great number of dead and wounded. Navarre remains stationary for 2 weeks, then moves to besiege the capital for a second time. Even though the defenders outnumber the attackers, given the last battles, the League's forces are reluctant to venture out of their defensive positions. But Paris is ill prepared for the 4-month siege. Stockpiles of food soon dwindle, and the defenders begin to eat dogs and horses. By August 1590, 30,000 people, a tenth of the city's population, die of starvation. But they still refuse to surrender because they know that relief is on its way. The Duke of Parma, Philip II's best general in the Low Countries, is already on the march to relieve Paris. As Parma nears the capital, Navarre is forced to detach part of his army to block the Spanish. Parma refuses to engage, and as more and more besiegers are funneled from the siege, a group of Spanish cavalry manages to sneak across the lines to bring supplies to Paris. Navarre realizes that the siege is pointless, therefore he disengages and splits up his army to do minor tasks. By the spring of 1591, Navarre is very short on funds, so he has to disband most of his army. Meanwhile, the League becomes divided. The 16 are increasingly unpopular as they become too radical even for the hardliners. Therefore, Mayenne launches a coup and deposes the 16, taking over leadership in Paris himself. While this was going on, the League's political position became even more untenable. In May 1590, the Cardinal of Bourbon dies, stripping the League's arguments of all plausibility. To keep up the spirit, new candidates are proposed, such as Mayenne, the young Duke of Guise, or even Philip II. But none of these candidates inspire any enthusiasm, and the League rapidly loses momentum. By autumn 1591, Navarre receives funds from England and the Dutch, and hires a large army of Germans. More reinforcements arrive from England, and Navarre goes on the offensive. In November, he commences the siege of Rouen, in the hope that by capturing it, he can cut off Paris from the sea. The defenders of Rouen endure the siege for months, knowing well that as before, relief is on its way. The Duke of Parma invades once more, and arrives before Rouen in January 1592. Navarre dispatches his cavalry to delay the Spanish, but Parma repulses their attack. A series of maneuvers follow, and as Parma crosses the Seine to conduct a siege, Navarre also crosses in the hope that he can trap the Spanish between the river and the sea. But Parma quickly builds a pontoon bridge, and just as Navarre is planning his final move, he evacuates his forces across the river. After this, Parma force marches to Paris and reinforces the garrison with Spanish soldiers before heading back to the Netherlands. But by 1593, all parties are tired of war. Hunger, banditry, pestilence, and peasant revolts reach a record level. Both sides are in low spirits, as fighting seems to go on forever with no end in sight. To resolve the impasse, an Estat General is called. Various candidates are proposed for the throne, including the Spanish Infanta. However, by now, most Catholics are distrustful of Spain. They would like law and order to prevail, but they would also require a Catholic king. Consequently, Henry of Navarre is approached again about his religion. After lengthy negotiations, Navarre finally agrees to convert. In July 1593, he becomes a Catholic. By doing this, he removes the final obstacle that prevented him from claiming the throne. Henry IV is crowned in February 1594. In March, he enters Paris nearly unopposed. But convincing all his countrymen and removing the Spanish threat will take time. In 1595, Henry moves against the rebels in Burgundy. They are defeated in spite of Spanish support. Mayenne capitulates after a sizable bribe is paid. But meanwhile, the Spanish seize the northern city of Amiens. Now, Henry marches to the north and ousts the Spanish by 1597. Peace with Spain is achieved in 1598. After some more campaigns and more bribes, the last remnants of the Catholic League are eliminated in the same year. In an attempt to achieve a lasting peace, the now Catholic Henry proposes a religious compromise to his Protestant comrades. The Edict of Nantes is proclaimed on April 30th, 1598. The treaty allows free worship everywhere where Protestantism already exists. The Huguenots receive scores of security towns, they can hold offices, and their priests and soldiers are to be paid by the state. On the other hand, the Catholic Church's property has to be restored, and Huguenots too will have to pay the tithe, as well as their other taxes. Also, they will not be allowed to form any political associations. The peace is first treated with skepticism by the population. Radicals on both sides are unsatisfied, but war is averted during Henry IV's reign. Military battles are moved to the courts of law. However, in this seeming peace, resistance is fermenting under the surface. Henry IV is assassinated by a radical Catholic in 1610. Shortly after, a religious war breaks out. After a hard-fought war that culminates with the siege of La Rochelle, the Protestants lose to their king. Louis XIV takes away all their privileges and nullifies the Edict of Nantes. Most Huguenots either convert or flee abroad. Full religious toleration will only be achieved after the French Revolution. Looking at what the war achieved, we are presented with a bleak picture. By the time of Francis I and Henry II, France was on its way to becoming the strongest European state. But great nobles resented the monarchy's power and joined their cause with religion to usurp this power for themselves. Thus weakened, France is paralysed for half a century. This gives Spain and the Habsburgs unparalleled primacy. Both the Huguenots and France itself come out on the losing side. However, the war does offer Protestants an indispensable break, and this means that more religious wars are to come.